Hello everyone, Shenn here for another little episode tonight. I think it's episode 7, Tea with Shenn, right? So, anyway, tonight I wanted to talk a little bit about more of a serious subject, basically death and the afterlife. And I wrote a little post for Facebook a couple months back, and it was when the pandemic was first happening, and so I was thinking about loss of life on a major scale, besides kind of what's personal, in our own families and that. And for the last 2 years, I've been taking care of my parents, and so they're in their late 80s, and my mom has dementia really bad, and so for her, life is just kind of in the moment because she doesn't really have the memories anymore that she used to. I don't think she really knows me as her son anymore, but I'm just kind of somebody who's there that takes care of her and helps her out. And she appreciates that. My dad, he's a little higher functioning, he can get up and walk around and make it to his recliner so he can watch some movies during the day, but more and more he's been sleeping a lot, and so some people say that that's when elderly people are getting kind of ready to make the transition to go on the other side, when they get to that point. But I wanted to read this post really quick, and it is kind of long, but it's kind of hard to remember word for word, so I think it'll be better for me to read it, and so I'll try to make it as entertaining as I can for reading something, right? So here goes, and I'll try to make this video so it's not too long. My post is called Death and the Afterlife, and this comes from, when I do my nightly meditations and I do a little bit of, these Reiki healing sessions at night, I'll be sitting there in bed and I'll be kind of just drifting off, and I'll be thinking about various things, and when I power up with Reiki, I can actually feel the Reiki heat and the comfort from it. And sometimes I do get visions or almost like dreams, right? And so on this particular night, I was thinking about my parents and how they were aging and what it's going to be like when they're no longer here, And so I kind of had, kind of an interesting vision of the afterlife, and I think it's maybe based on some of my religious upbringing, but then, I also had was exposed to quite a few different cultures in my life and different religious ideas, so maybe it's a combination of all these. But when I receive a download from Reiki Spirit, I call it Reiki Spirit or Divine Spirit, then it really rings true for me. And so these ideas of the afterlife, they might not fit your beliefs or your religious ideas, but here goes. Death and the afterlife. I've been thinking a lot about death lately. Not the decay or the morbid parts of it, like how our body is broken down and reclaimed by the earth, but the actual transition. What is death exactly? Where do those other parts of us go? The mind, the soul, and the spirit. What happens in the afterlife? I am a caregiver for my elderly parents, and I'm in this daily routine of being with them, helping them out with all the little things that they need help with now. I notice how they reflect upon their past, how all the strong memories of their lives, the joyful times and traumatic times shaped and affected them. They are aware that they have little time left, and it seems like a waiting game for them, or like waiting in the doctor's office for the nurse to call your name. So you sit there and occupy your mind with thoughts of what's on the TV or who else is there waiting with you. My dad is now wanting to sleep most of his days. He talks about visiting his past in his dreams, and to him, I think he lives more in his dreams than in his daily routine. My mother has dementia, which in a way lets her focus on the moment. Whether she is looking over a magazine or watching TV, she doesn't really say much, but smiles sometimes when I tickle her feet. Sometimes she reaches out to touch me when I walk by. I think if you are not aware of your past or of the future and you're just in the moment, then in a way you are pure. Meditating on it, these ideas presented themselves to me. And so this was from my my little Reiki kind of self-meditation. You know, I kind of went into this little dream. And I started kind of thinking about what death actually is, and what it seems, the force behind it, and what it seems to be. Expiration date. It seems that we all have this expiration date. I envision some sort of barrier that rises up before us, similar to a doorway that we cannot escape at our time of death. It's like being aware of it when it is there before you, and even if you don't want to enter, the world revolves around you and forces you through it. So in a way, this means that you can do all sorts of crazy things in your life and take all sorts of risks, because if it is not your time, it is not your time. Your own personality or inner self and sense of fear will regulate this anyway, so even if you knew this, your common sense would not let you test this idea. Odds are that you will just get hurt really bad and mangled and have to live that way until your prearranged death time comes for you. I have this feeling that this death time is actually prearranged by our own consent. Something along the idea of when you plan a vacation. You set the time, date, and place to start your trip and have a basic game plan for what you are trying to accomplish on your trip, and then you also set the time and date of your return. In this case, your death. So since this death time is prearranged, it is encoded in your other bodies. The inner sleeves of your energetic body that resides in your physical body. This allows your interdimensional self to reside in your physical form. So these inner bodies form a bridge between dimensions. You could say that each body is like a layer, which goes from the pure dimension of spirit forms to each heavier or dense dimension until it interacts with the physical or material form. So kind of like having multiple pairs of gloves on over each other, the first pair of gloves next to your skin is like the first layer touching the spiritual self. And it has a connectivity for the spirit to touch and act, and it can respond and send these messages to a heavier dimension, which is the next pair of gloves. All of these layers overlap dimensions to allow this to take place. The last pair of gloves, which would allow you to touch snow and give you feedback, is like the physical body sleeve itself that can let you interact with this material world. This concept is simple and complex to think about. Many religions have ideas of what these layers are. The spirit, the soul, the mind, both subconscious and unconscious, the logical waking mind, and these have various names and concepts of what they are depending on the religion or culture. So within these sleeves are also an expiration date hardwired into their creation. So there is no cheating your time. The angel of death. Let's take a sip before I get into that one, huh? The angel of death. I didn't perceive an angel or being carrying out this function. It seemed more like a force of nature, a barrier or energetic wave that would come before you at that time and place which you had to go through. Not so much cross as being more like a filter that you move through, which separates your inner bodies back into the dimensions which they emanate from. I was shown something like a wave or bridge that the world rotated under, and this death field was like a cleansing or purifying function for this world. The separated spiritual parts leaving the shells or husks of the physical body behind. So this idea actually made me feel better about life, death as a natural progression of forms existing from multiple dimensions, joining, forming bonds, interlocking, and transforming into life. The life experiencing the material world, and when the time of death comes, the bonds dissolving, and each of the interdimensional forms taking with it the knowledge it had gained. Death and the afterlife. The place of many mansions. So after passing through this death wave, I saw multitudes moving and walking outward into this new place. It seemed that one's desires or expectations as you moved with intention also formed the landscape. This place was malleable and created forms just from your thoughts. It seemed like these newly dead had just such intense mental power that the landscape shimmered with endless variety of form, most of these inexplicably beautiful. I noticed that groups of the dead were gathering together. It seemed that those with similar cultures or religious ideas had found each other and had collectively formed their own mansions of heaven or afterlife reality which they expected. The more of these dead gathered, having the same intent and expectation, the more solid these places of wonder appeared. As I looked out on this landscape or place, it seemed to go on forever outward with beautiful palaces and with mountains and lakes and rivers, woods, wonderful places, temples, cities of light. So even though this space or dimension was not of earth, many things appeared earth-like. I saw before me generations of connected souls of the dead. From their linking with the newly dead, the older dead were reinvigorated and their forms were added to or built upon. I also noticed as I looked outward to the far horizon that some of these places or forms that were created by the minds of the dead were starting to dissolve. It seemed that after so many generations, connections were lost, and individual souls without connections didn't seem to have the power to manifest their forms anymore. I felt that some of these dead souls realized that they were just creating and existing in a space that they themselves had created, and it had lost interest for them. Maybe the gathered experiences of their material life had exhausted all of its desires and attachments, and had played with or fantasized about every version of every scenario so many times that it had become bored. I think that this is what caused this breakdown of the cities and the dwellings on the outskirts of this place. The next part. The waterfall and stars. I seemed to be floating or drifting about the cities of the dead in this afterlife realm as I moved outward and away from the death field from which issued endless souls as they entered the space of fantastic forms. Beautiful dwellings, palaces, temples, and cities of light. I noticed some dwellings that seemed to be empty and were in the state of dissolution. I came closer and could hear a rumbling sound in the distance. There were fewer and fewer wandering souls here. They seemed to be slowly moving towards something on the horizon. The rumbling sound became louder, almost overwhelming. Then there appeared a cliff or depression in the land with a roaring waterfall-like formation. It was like the fabric of the space folded in upon itself, and the rumbling was the sound of a dimensional crossover or overlap. Into this space I saw many souls peering as if in concentration, and then throwing themselves off and into the gap. I was thinking, hey, that's suicide. Then I realized, no, that's life. The rumbling waterfall took my attention for quite a while. It was like the churning of universes forming. Then I noticed that there were rivers of light that flowed from the sky and from above this place that were feeding this waterfall. Each of these streams of pure light or energy seemed to come from these points of light. As I looked closer to these points of light, I could see that they were once souls too, but these were stars, brighter than the sun, each emanating a flow of spiritual matter from some other dimension. It felt that these stars had not the imagined forms or fantasies about the afterlife. They were the souls of those who were empty of all those desires. They had stepped into the flow of the divine emanation and were conduits for the pure energy of creation. They existed eternally and didn't need to join in the never-ending pattern of life and death, for they had transcended it. These stars were in a permanent state of now, from the never-ending flow of intense light and matter moving through them. I think that is what sustained them. So what I felt or learned about this is that when we die, each of us carry with us our life experience recorded within our dimensional bodies within us, which forms our soul. Our soul will create our expected reality within this afterlife space. So our dreams of heaven, our religious ideas will all come true. We will receive our reward or punishment. We will join with our ancestors and live with them for time beyond measuring, until at some point our own desires and creations seem empty, and we seek to experience more, to learn more, to evolve more. And guess what? Then we leave this space of imagination to enter into another material incarnation. So the Hindus and the Buddhists seem to know about this, the Taoists also. Their idea of hell is to keep incarnating into endless lives. Their idea of enlightenment is to empty oneself of desire and attachment in this life, maybe to be empty of these illusions in the afterlife also. Many religions just focus on one life, the one that they can control, and they try to make us purchase an afterlife based on loyalty and obedience to their law. This also has its own reality, for the spiritual agreements you make will have a reality in your afterlife as well. So that finishes my post. I think I read it correctly, and hopefully the video didn't run too long. And I have quite a few more subjects to talk about in coming Teas with Shenn. Some other experiences that I've had in meditation, experiences when I was just a child that were kind of supernatural. And so we'll start to get all these stories going in a new video. So thanks again for joining me tonight.